I'm Mary Rose. I am the author of the Inquiring Minds interviews on Cal Catholic Daily. I'm interviewing Father Joseph Illo, pastor of Star of the Sea Parish in San Francisco, about his most recent blog, Change Your Lane, from November 28th. Father Illo's blogs can be found at fatherilloblog.com.
Is
So,
choose your lane.
choose your lane. What did I say? Change your lane? Okay, yes. Choose your lane. Don't change your lane. My first question is actually, you say in your blog that making decisions is more important than making the right decision. But you also say that when you were younger, people were forced to make decisions. Now people have more options and they don't make decisions. So why is making decisions so important?
I wouldn't say we were forced to make decisions, but the options were limited, so we were encouraged to make decisions more quickly and decisively. And why is making a decision important? Well, the ability to choose one path or another is in freedom is distinctively human. It's part of the human dimension of divine likeness. So it's what makes us human, what the ability to choose or make an act of the will. A human act is essentially a willed act, not a forced act or an act that is motivated simply by impulse, by instinct. So the more we decide to act, the more human we are. The less we decide to act, the more we allow circumstances to just push us through life, the less human we are.
Okay, I see that. I guess in the context, I mean, you had it you placed it in the context of a sermon you gave, telling the men of your parish to enter the priesthood or get married. And I guess my question is, to be the devil's advocate here, when you were younger or in earlier generations, people were kind of forced to either enter the seminary or get married. They had fewer options. They had to make a decision. Nowadays, people don't have to make that decision. Is it bad, if they're living a virtuous life, to not make either of those decisions?
Yes, it is. Because you can't live a fully virtuous life without embracing your vocation. And all of us are called to do something beautiful for God with our lives. So to put that off to some degree is not glorifying God. To float through life eating, drinking, sleeping without really working, without prayer. I firmly believe prayer always leads us to the will of God. It's not the will of God that any of us waste time on earth, but we're given time and energy, the ability to decide and act, to glorify God and to save his people, to save souls. So not deciding is deciding not to glorify God.
Okay, but continuing down as devil's advocate here, I mean, wouldn't you agree that, for instance, say in the 50s and 60s, a lot of men chose to become priests who were not called to be priests? They made a
Yeah,
decision. They decided, and they made that decision, and it was the wrong decision. They did not have the calling to be a priest. So couldn't you say we can't force a vocation? So if someone's not hearing a call, how are they supposed to make a decision?
I'm not sure what percentage of priests entered holy orders who were not supposed to be priests. I mean, that's a good question. Certainly, there's always that possibility in every age. Perhaps in the 50s, I think maybe you're referring to the sexual abuse problems, the crimes that clergy committed. I'm not sure they weren't called to the priesthood. They betrayed the priesthood, they betrayed the church, but that doesn't mean they weren't called to the priesthood. So I don't see a compelling argument that in the 50s and 60s, men entered the priesthood who were not called. That is, they made the wrong decision. They made the wrong decision to commit crimes as priests. But as I say, in an earlier time, young people had to make a decision with their life vocation, because if you didn't eat. You had to find a career, or there wasn't the welfare state like we have it today. And there was perhaps a greater work ethic because of that. And I think that was very helpful. Culture, this is society, encouraged young men and women to lead productive lives instead of being wards of the state or wards of their parents, as is more common when, and I understand why young people today put off career decisions or vocation decisions, because they don't have to. And we were pretty much required to do so, as you say, forced.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's another thing I'm wondering is, when you say decide, be decisive, make decisions, I mean, isn't it often the case that someone has, or I guess I should ask you this, when there's a late vocation, someone enters the priesthood later in life, say, do you think he was ignoring the call for some reason earlier on, or is he called at a specific time? Because that would be another thing to make a decision. Say someone's not called right now to the priesthood, or not called right now to married life. Are they being indecisive by not choosing, or are they just not called right now?
There's distinctively that possibility. Every case is different. And some people that don't enter a vocation until later in life, perhaps, I would say many, were not hearing the call, maybe not through their own fault. We live in a culture that obscures the word of God, the will of God. Most people today are not raised with any integrated faith. So how would you hear the call to God to be a consecrated person if you don't even know the faith, you don't know the catechism? I think there may be cases where people were not called as a young person to that particular, certainly a married person whose wife dies and then is called to the priesthood after that, is called later in life. Who's to know? But I think a lot of the culture promotes indecision and keeping options open and fear of commitment. Fear is the driving factor here. People are afraid to make the wrong decision, so they don't make any decision. And as I say in the blog, it's better to make a wrong decision than to make no decision in many cases. We have to act prudently, but when we put off a decision for an inordinate amount of time, then that's must be motivated by fear of making a mistake, and that has to be overcome.
Yeah, no, I see that, and I agree that's what I see that a lot in society. But also, I guess I'm just being defensive of these indecisive guys, even though even though I see the problem. And when your other option for them to get married, and you said there's lots of women in your parish who are just waiting, could it also be that the reason young people are not getting married is that, I mean, I guess this could also apply to entering religious life, is that they have more impediments than people did, say, in the 50s and 60s, due to their upbringing and due to things like that. There's more psychological scarring. There's things they might not be right now ready to be a good priest or ready to be a good spouse and parent.
Now, that's a good point. To make that kind of a decision, one has to be ready, and it's not the fault of most young people today that they have not received the faith. So, however, I'm not. I hope I'm not assigning blame so much as encouraging young people to believe that they can make a decision, to get the formation the tools they need to make a decision for their life's vocation and to get on with it. So I hope I'm not sounding deprecatory of young people today. I mean, those of us who are old people have always been a little frustrated with young people because every generation has their own gifts and challenges. But what I hope to do is to show young people that you do not need to be afraid of making a life decision. And here are the tools to do it. And we've had a lot of weddings in our parish over the last 2 years, relatively speaking. I think before we started our young adults group and perpetual adoration at the parish and kind of stronger homilies, we hadn't had a wedding for several years. We hadn't had a baptism for about 10 years. But we've had about 15 weddings in the last 2 years, most coming from our young adults group. And it's because young people are seeing that with prayer and formation, they can make a decision. And some of those marriages have had some rocky moments. But with the grace of God and the support of the community, they've ridden them out. I mean, none of them have divorced so far. That is the last couple of years. So we pray that the difficulties can be overcome with young people today. And there are many difficulties, as you say.
Well, and that's part of it too. I mean, even with those, I mean, part of when you start things like perpetual adoration and young adult groups and have sound teaching, you start to attract parishioners who come from families that have a solid foundation. So in that way, I mean, I just saying the experiment is skewed a little bit because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that all these people are being formed because of the parish. They're also coming from backgrounds that are formed. So I would say even say it could be that men in your parish, I mean, it sounds like you're having some weddings, but you say there are lots of women. What if they look at the women and they think, well, I would like a wife who could homeschool the children and who grew up with siblings, so she would be used to that, or whatever. Like they're looking for someone, they want a particular thing, and they're not seeing it in the women in your parish. Or they want to have 12 kids, and it's like, well, all the women are a little bit older. That's not possible, outside of God's miracles. I guess I just putting it as you just choose a wife like you do a winter coat doesn't seem practical, which is another thing you stress in your, or maybe too practical. I don't know which way to put it in your blog.
No, fair enough. And I'm not getting married, so I can look at this abstractly. And I know that a big decision like that, a change in your life to get married, could ruin your life, or it could make it very difficult. So I appreciate the hesitancy and the prudence of our young people when they see so many marriages miserable and breaking up. It wasn't that way when I was growing up. I think I'm being a little bit snarky here and saying, choose your lane, just like you're on the freeway. You just put the blinker on and you change your lane. It's that easy. And it's not. But and by the way, I didn't come up with the choose your lane analogy. That was the young people. They said, "Hey, Father, I loved your choose your lane sermon." I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I don't remember saying that. I never said that during the homily. So they want to see a path, and it was the women actually that said that. I think the women came up with the choose your lane moniker because I think they want men to choose their lane. I think it's fatherless America that's our biggest problem. That men shoulder the responsibility of providing for the family and leading the family. So in a sense, there's more pressure on the man. Understandable, then men are more hesitant. But the women want to be supportive of the men in their life. Of course, they don't know what that entails. Nobody does until you're married. I dated a girl for 2 years in college, and we knew an older couple. I'll never forget. when the father of that couple said, "Well, I don't know, care what anybody says, but you don't know anything about your wife until you marry her, until after the wedding. You know nothing about her until you start living with her as her husband." So that's the adventure. That's the diving backwards into midair that marriage and the priesthood entails. So yes, it's frightening. It has to be done carefully. I don't mean to be blasé about it, but perhaps I'm saying it that way just to emphasize a point that it can be done and it must be done for human flourishing. So we
Okay,
have
well
to
then,
find.
okay, last question, which might be quick. If you present decisiveness as a virtue and indecisiveness and one, and virtue is the mean, and so if indecisive is at one end of the spectrum of the vice, what's at the other end?
You mean if decisiveness is the mean?
Yes, if
Maybe
decisiveness
it's
is in the middle,
yes.
the virtue.
So the virtue is always in the middle. Well, the opposite vice from indecisiveness would be foolhardiness, imprudence. And you're right, I haven't talked about that. But that bears discussion and reflection as well. That it's not the problem most of us face today because we have these cushions all around us that allow us not to be decisive. But one can be, in a sense, too decisive, or I should say, imprudently decisive, or reckless, or foolhardy, and that would be the vice on the other end of the spectrum.